Hello to this very important webinar on EU enlargement. This will be an extremely important event if one looks upon both enlargement, but obviously also the future of the European Union. My name is Lykke Friis, co-chair of European Council for Foreign Relations, and also director of think tank Europa. So I'm here in Copenhagen, sort of chairing this meeting. But we'll soon also have Vesla from Bulgaria also joining us in order to comment on the various sort of important sort of also figures that ECFR has just published today. And with us, we also have the Foreign Minister of North Macedonia, Mr. Buja Osmani. Thank you very much for joining us. Looking very much forward to your sort of evaluation of the overall situation, but obviously also your reactions to the data that now Ingrid Morina, Senior Policy Fellow from ECFR, will sort of give us a snap sort of preview of, or at least sort of elaborate on what were actual results when you conducted the opinion polls in 6 European member states, including Denmark. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Lykke. I'm very glad to be doing this together with you and Minister Osmani at these very crucial times ahead of the council meeting. So, as you mentioned, we did a flash poll recently as a follow-up to our power audit on views and opinions of member states, 27 member states on enlargement. And so the flash poll covers countries of Germany, Austria, France, Denmark, Poland, and Romania. So we did a bit of a mix of old members, new members, those a little bit skeptical towards enlargement, those more pro towards enlargement. And the results that we have is that in general, Europeans are open to the idea of Ukraine joining the EU, despite the costs and the risks. But they are somehow lukewarm when it comes to the perspective of other countries, such as Georgia and the countries of the Western Balkans joining in. And so as 27 heads of states are about to get together and discuss the Commission's proposal in Brussels Thursday and Friday, to look more closely into the Commission's proposal to formally open talks with Ukraine and Moldova, and eventually Bosnia and Herzegovina down the line, but also to grant candidate status to Georgia, things don't look very clear-cut. So to add to this, Viktor Orban's opposition or obstructionism, it doesn't look all very, very appealing right now. But our data reveals that yes, there is a positive attitude overall for the candidacies of Ukraine, but not so much for Moldova. But Moldova and Montenegro are in a way favorable in comparison to other Western Balkan countries. But there are deep economic and security concerns, and also the view of further enlarged Europe and what would that mean to Europe's power in the world. We there also saw some differing views. So, for example, in Denmark, Lykke, and you will talk more about this, the support is the highest. It's about 50% for Ukraine joining the EU soon, and in Poland, relatively the same, 47% of opinions are pro-Ukraine joining. Romania is closer to the positive camp with 32% joining, but 29% are against. In Germany, it's not so optimistic. 37% are pro, while 39% are against. And in France, it's unfortunately even worse. 29% are pro and 35% against. And Austria, the worst of the list, is 52% opposing Ukraine joining. But you know, as in general, 45% of Europeans polled responded that with concerns about Ukraine's accession and its impact on the EU security. So roughly 25% feel that this would enhance the security of Europe, while 39% believe the entry of Ukraine will negatively affect their country's security. And many Europeans also don't see any economic benefits to Ukraine's membership. So 43% in Poland and 37% in Romania see a positive impact of further enlargement to EU's economy, while 54% in Denmark and 46% in Austria see a cost to this. So on the fears about the impact of enlargement on EU's political power in the world, the data reveal an interesting view as well. Again, Poland and Denmark are most optimistic about this. 43% and respectively 35% believe that Ukraine accession to the EU would have a positive impact. In Austria, 42%, and in Germany, 32% don't share the same view. They believe that Ukraine's membership would reduce EU's political power in the world. France and Romania remain evenly split. And then there is also a very clear divide between old and new members. Respondents in Austria, Germany, and France, relatively 50%, are feeling likely that EU should not admit new members. By contrast, Romania, 51%, and Poland, 48%, believe that EU should be looking to expand. So in this, Denmark remains an outlier, with 37% opposing any immediate enlargement. And so, in overall, because we also ask questions about Turkey, and the survey reveals a strong opposition to the possibility of Turkey joining the EU. With 51% of those surveyed across the 6 countries opposing the idea, and fewer than 1 in 5 respondents supporting any forward movement in Turkey's membership. With regards to Western Balkan countries, Europeans seem to be somehow lukewarm on Albania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Kosovo, but also Georgia and Moldova, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia joining the EU, and this is the support is at around 30% of people polled believe that these countries could join the EU soon. Among these countries, Kosovo scores with 20% pro, but with 30% against. Albania is somehow close to pro and against, with 25% pro and about 30 against. Serbia is more or less the same as Albania, and Georgia is relatively the same as the previous 2. The opinion is, strangely enough, quite divided with regards to North Macedonia, with 26% pro and 27% against. And Bosnia scores at 28% pro and 29% against. But for Moldova, for instance, the support is quite high than those that oppose its membership, and similar to Montenegro as well. This, in combination to the work that we did on the power audit, reveals that although there is political rhetoric, for example, where it should be quite positive about EU's need to enlarge, there is a serious lack of deep thinking. On top of this, or coupled with this, there is no real efforts have been made so far to bring the public along. So the publics are lagging behind as a general rule, with few exceptions in Denmark and Poland in these different questions areas that we asked. Maybe I stop here, Luca, with a brief overview of polls, and I can come in further on after we have heard the minister and yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. And as we all know, opinion polls, well, they're always a snapshot, you could say, of the mood in the various member states where we do our polling. So things change, and sometimes they change quickly, but obviously it gives you some kind of idea of what the public is in the 6 member states that we polled. Minister, thank you so much for joining us. Before we get to the figures, I would just like to ask you about the upcoming summit. What is at stake also for your country? What's at stake for your region? And also, for Europe as such. Over to you, and thank you so much for doing this again.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm glad that I can be part of this discussion, and I'd like to commend ECFR for this timely survey as we are getting to the December summit. These numbers that Angelusha just shared sort of reflected my narrative that I've been presenting it lately, that there is obviously a window opened due to the geopolitical circumstances changing as a result of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and that the awareness among member states has risen due to this, and so we need to use this window of opportunity. And I supposed, and I think these numbers sort of confirm this thinking of mine, that this opening is temporarily. And soon as the geopolitical dynamics will slow down or will take other direction due to election processes, whether in EU or in the United States, seeing it from worldwide perspective, also the awareness will fade away. And therefore December was so important for us, because we thought this is our chance. You know, I have this thesis that EU accession process is both meritocratic and geopolitical. So is geopolitical in terms that the thick iron doors of EU open at certain geopolitical momentums, but then enter only those who are readier at that moment in point. So I thought the geopolitical momentum is there. Those, at least from the Western Balkans, who are readier, and you know that North Macedonia has been the front runner for, I would say, for decades, now should use this opportunity. But unfortunately, you know, the ball is now in our court due to the constitutional reform we are not able to do because of the opposition resistance. But certainly our eyes are in Brussels. Last night I worked out with our colleagues throughout the European Union because of the Council conclusions that were being debated there. For us, it's important. We have never seen our process into a competitive mode, putting it into a competitive mode with Ukraine, because Ukraine is a different story now. Ukraine is playing different game, you know, in a way, because it's fighting for all of us. If Ukraine fails, then the idea of having a strong geopolitical European Union will fail, and then certainly will affect our ambition or our enthusiasm for the process. So regardless of what the dynamics for the Western Balkans will be, I think Ukraine is important, that will get the right message. And here I encourage all those who make the decision that this should not be seen through the prism of our national policies, or neither pure EU foreign policy interest or enlargement interest, but rather through the security dimension of it. And I hope that December will be a momentum for Ukraine to get the right message at this point in time, and certainly Western Balkans. But I can respond or comment to the survey or the dynamics. Since you know, I've been presenting lately, North Macedonia is a case study, unfortunately, for the default and imposed defects of the EU accession process. And I've been even lately talking about new dimension, a hidden perspective of negotiations over negotiating countries. And this is the negative impact. You know, when you hear it for the first time, you would say, well, this is nonsense. How can negotiation process impact negatively the societal dynamics in the negotiating countries? Because either it's positive if it's there, or neutral if it's not there. What we are seeing with North Macedonia, and this is due to the protraction of the process, that EU negotiating process creates this, what I call development dependency, sort of a conditioning where a Pavlovian reflex is being introduced. when everything is set in a way that depends on the EU dynamics. And if you see empirically the chronology of the domestic reform agenda, EU-related domestic agenda in North Macedonia, is highly dependent on the EU perspective. So you take the 20 years of North Macedonia EU accession process, you see good progress, either reflected in the EU Commission report, the yearly progress report, or the domestic reports, when the perspective was good. But as the times go by, we cross a point that we thought is not there, when the EU negotiating process start having a negative impact on societies, in deteriorating political dynamics or political landscape, as it's happening in North Macedonia, or even the overall reform agenda. So this is something new that we didn't think it's there, that negotiations could have a negative impact, since if negotiations would not be there, then the countries will create their own system of dependency and sort of expectations and agenda. But when it's so interdependent with EU, and this is not moving, not being meritocratic, but rather hijacked by bilateral issues, then negotiations have this negative impact. And this is one more reason why we think it's crucial that there is more understanding about finding a way out of this stalemate in which Western Balkans have been put in.
Thank you. We'll get back to that, about the stalemate and what can be done there. I think also, as Angelusha pointed out at the beginning, this is, and you also alluded to that, Mr. Minister, sorry, that this is really, really important moment, window of opportunity, you could say, for Europe with regards to enlargement. I think there is a parallel here, being in Copenhagen. It's raining outside, but still, we had the very, very important summit back in 2002, when the so-called Big Bang enlargement was agreed upon. So the EU managed to close negotiations with 10 countries. Now, when you look back upon it, well, you think, okay, obviously that had to happen. But actually, just think about if we had not succeeded back then in 2002, well, then you could say, okay, we could just have met again in January 2003. But hang on, in January 2003, you already had a debate about the war in Iraq. And you had sort of a clear dividing lines between old and new Europe. So I'm not sure whether one would have been able then to close accession negotiations if one had not sort of used the moment to do it in December. Actually, it was the 13th of December. Isn't it 13th of December today? I think it is, isn't it? What's the day today?
Is it for me?
No, what's the day today? It's the 13th of December. Okay, so it's tomorrow. Tomorrow is the big anniversary day, you could say. But my point is there simply that if you now look upon what will happen next year, what's then our chance of being able then to open negotiations next year if we don't do it this week? And we have 7 sort of national elections coming up. We have the election to the European Parliament. You could also maybe make the prediction that some countries will already be looking upon the presidential election in America, who's going to win that one. So to me, at least, it is extremely crucial that there is a decision now, and we don't gamble and say, well, let's just see whether we can agree upon this in January and February. What's your take on that? Maybe we should start with you, Angelusha. Is it that crucial, what I'm saying here, or should you say, well, we can just do it in January, February, and March?
Absolutely. I think with the situation in Ukraine, in battlefields, and with the fact that we have seen Russia's president already feeling a little bit more confident that he's winning the war, plus other factors that you mentioned, elections in Europe, parliamentary elections coming up in Europe, elections in the United States, plus the fact that there could be, Ukraine's support to Ukraine, it's still not to be looked at with, through the prism of negativity, but still, there could be issues in the US Congress that could affect this support coming from US for Ukraine. So all this together, it will be quite a devastating blow. And I think Foreign Minister Kuleba said this yesterday, he said something along the lines of, I don't even want to think about the consequences of a negative opinion coming out of this week's council meeting. So it will not only be a negative, a devastating blow to Ukrainians, but also quite kind of a message to Europeans and to everyone else out there who started believing, including, I think, ourselves, the remaining enlargement enthusiasts, who started believing that there is some hope that EU has finally understood that it's very important to enlarge for its own security. In a way, if we talk about Western Balkans, in a way, this is probably one of the last chances to somehow limit the influence, the malign influence from Russia and China. And so there is a lot at play here that really concerns security and stability of Europe, as much as it concerns stability and security of the neighborhood. And of course, Ukraine is the top of the list here.
Yeah, but I think one of the main conclusions of the poll is that, well, this is not about us, it's about them, right? I mean, if you look upon the Danish figures, you could say, yes, there's a big support. You also highlighted that. I mean, together with Poland, the highest among the 6 countries that we polled. So there's big support for Ukraine. But when you then ask the Danes, okay, what do you think would happen if we would enlarge with Ukraine? Well, then you see that, well, there's actually the feeling that have a negative impact both on our security and on our economy, which sort of puts you in a situation where it's very much an emotional argument. We are on Team Ukraine, you could say. But it doesn't seem as if the argument has been bought, so to speak, or the message has been understood that this is also about our own security. We are apparently doing this for them and not for us. And when you look upon the Danish figures, I think it's also very interesting, and you also said that already, and Galucci, when you look upon the figures regards to West Balkans, we have in Denmark, for instance, a much lower sort of support for the West Balkans. So I guess the very sort of direct question to you, Mr. Minister, would be, what is it that we have not understood? I mean, for instance, Denmark, but also many other countries. Why do you think that we have this many people saying, well, we don't really know about West Balkans and also your own country, or maybe, well, the skepticism, or maybe people just haven't decided yet, which is also rather, you could say, normal if you look upon politics in general. Over to you.
Yeah, first, I think these numbers have been certainly affected by the intensity of the geopolitical scale of the events around Ukraine. And therefore the awareness about what the security impact would be of including Ukraine into the European system, or giving a negative message to the Ukrainians now as they are fighting not only for them, but for all of us, as I said previously. And the second, I don't think the enlargement debate has been the dominant narrative in the member states, because it's not an imminent need or a challenge for the public or for the governments. And therefore, I don't think this should be sort of a guiding light for the governments to decide, because I don't think is very well informed public opinion about the impact and the circumstances of a very complex process, such as the accession process. In the Western Balkans, there is an opposite effect. The elasticity of EU credibility is overstretching in a way. And when will be the turning points when I think it will be detrimental for the process here in the region? When EU card will not be a winning card for elections. So far, I would say in the majority of candidate countries, but the Western Balkan countries, EU is still the winning ticket. The competition between main political parties running for a government is about who will bring EU faster or better in the countries. North Macedonia will be, again, I believe, the litmus test, because the upcoming elections, if there will be no clarity at this December Council of the European Union, the next elections might be the first elections when EU court might be the losing court. I'm not saying we are still there. We have still time to not to recover, but to save the process. But when it will start, EU court will start becoming a losing court for elections, then you will have a chain reaction throughout the region. And then we have lost the region, and then we have created a fertile ground for malign influences hijacking the political and societal dynamics here. Therefore, I think EU governments should lead in at these sort of in this critical juncture in which we are put in. Let me take an example. 80% of people in North Macedonia were against the Prespa agreement on the name change, because they thought this will sort of endanger the identity of people. Macedonians will disappear from the map of nations. And now, 5 years later, when people realize that by adding North to North Macedonia, though it was painful process for any country that would negotiate, Macedonians remained Macedonians as they have been for centuries. And now you have a majority of people supporting Prespa agreement. So imagine if we as a government then, we were guided only by the public opinion of the moment that was used by the political stakeholders in order to bring fear to people, so they can translate that fear into votes for the election. So we decided to lead because we thought this is the only way forward for the country. And today we have our people on board with us, at least regarding the Prespa agreement. So therefore, I believe the government should design a stratcom strategy on the enlargement for their public, particularly related to Western Balkans, because Western Balkans is at the heart of continent. And I've been saying so many times, Western Balkans at the moment is a wound for the body of EU, and wound serves two purposes: either our bleeding point, either our entry point for germs. And if Western Balkans is left unattended because of electoral calculations only, it might become either a bleeding point or an entry point for malign factors to hijack the dynamics here, and then of course being a great platform to spread throughout the continent.
Thank you for a very clear statement with regards to that. I think it's also important maybe to go a little bit back in time, Angelusha, because we've been having some debates about enlargement for, well, at least half a year, one could say, and one goes back half a year. Personally, I was also rather optimistic. I thought, okay, one will be able to open negotiations. Also, when we got the sort of various report cards, you could say, by the Commission on Ukraine, also Moldova and Georgia. And there was this feeling, yes, of course, that you would be able to open accession negotiations. There was already a big debate about what kind of institutional reform would we have to carry out. Should it be now? Should it be later? A debate also about whether one should set a goal for when one could sort of conclude negotiations on the new budget and so forth. And suddenly we are here now in a situation where we do not even know whether the EU will be able to open accession negotiations Friday, Saturday, Sunday, maybe. What's actually happened to the enthusiasm that one at least seemed that was going to develop? What's your take on that? What actually happened?
So in our previous work that we did in the power audit, we looked into the polls and we compared them. This is mainly Eurobarometer polls, and we compare them to the last enlargement phase in 2004. And so in, let's say, March 2022, the EU support for Ukraine was quite high. It was around 63%, which is much higher than previous enlargement phase, which was below 60%, even below 50%. I think the average was 44%, in fact. So, and then we are 20 months after the war, since the war had started, Obviously, the support for Ukraine in Europe is waning, although the political rhetoric somehow remained there, but without the deep thinking on how to do, on the how. And this is, I think, this is the main problem now. You know, obviously, EU leaders, EU 27, know exactly who they're dealing with among themselves. So obviously, they knew that there is the Hungaries of this world, and then Slovakias of this world, and Austria recently, just recently, with some of the statements. So, and I think what happened in the meantime, there was maybe too much talk on the institutional reform and not enough talk on how to go and on how to actually go about it in practical terms. Just an example, institutional reform debate, it's also being seen by some of the candidate countries as a smokescreen for countries to hide behind it. That in fact there is not this, you know, despite the political rhetoric, there is no willingness in Europe to go ahead with enlargement. And so I think there are things that could be done still. I think the day could be saved. The institutional reform debate, as decided in Granada, could go parallelly with steps taken to enlarge within the enlargement process. And I think one of these steps could be, which we, you know, elaborate a little bit, could be, you know, getting candidate countries to start their, or to incentivize candidate countries to start their reform and get as close as possible, as deeply integrated as possible into the EU by 2030. So we also talk about this date, 2030, and we don't say that 2030 should be the date when everyone joins the EU, but we say that 2030 should be the target date where Europe prepares itself, but also candidate countries do everything that they could do in order to come as deeply closer to EU, as deeply integrated as possible. One of these areas that has been mentioned before by others apart from us is, of course, economic integration, single market area. And for this, you know, countries would need to engage into a lot of rule of law reform. But we're not suggesting that, you know, single market should be the only thing that everyone should focus on. We're saying at least by 2030 or by 2028. So there are still things that could be done parallelly to the institutional reform. And we discussed this looking in different settings. Institutional reform is very important, but it shouldn't drag down the enlargement process. So it should continuously happen parallelly to the enlargement process. And I think, I mean, there was still optimism in October after the Granada meeting, when the leaders, 27 EU leaders, started this conversation, and they decided that it's in the conclusion. They decided that these two processes will be run parallelly. And now here we are, you know, 2 days or 1 day before because Western Balkan summit will start tomorrow. It's really not clear at all what's going to happen, and there's a lot of pessimism and a gloomy atmosphere in Brussels, in Berlin, and so on and so forth.
And talking about sort of membership and enlargement, it's always been this either or, this binary sort of issue. Either you're in or you're out. I've seen some statements by you, Mr. Minister, that one could maybe also try to unpack sort of membership, or at least sort of create a more sort of a more flexible sort of process where you could maybe participate in some areas before others, observer status, sort of in order, I presume, to keep up the momentum and then make sure that there is actually a membership perspective in your country. Could you maybe sort of highlight your ideas with regards to that?
Yeah. So what we promoted as an idea and tried to at least get consensus among the 6 Western Balkan countries, and even I presented a non-paper and send it to all my colleagues from Western Balkans 6, so we can have a joint position in order to present it to EU. So it won't be seen, whatever new ideas there are, should not be seen as top-down, new creative idea being brought from Brussels to the Balkans, but rather something bottom-up, something that has a ground here. People understand, people believe in it, and then is a joint venture. And we label it as more integration before membership. The idea came from the realization that there is one big source of frustration for the candidates and for the member states, and this is this default defect of the EU accession process stemming from the all-in or nothing approach to membership. So as you said, when you are out, you have no benefits from the process, and the process is long, is unpredictable, uncertain, bumpy, with many sacrifices along the way, without political incentives for the political leaders to push the reform agenda, since there are no deliverables within their tenure, their mandate, and no deliverables for the people. So what we saw is that first, politicians are not incentivized enough to have this agenda as the dominant narrative for their political agendas. And also we lost the people along the way. And you see the surveys in the Balkans, the frustrations are becoming bigger and bigger. The sympathy toward third actors, it's higher and higher. But also we realize that actually this momentum is also sort of frustration for the candidates, for the member states, because the only fear for EU member states from completion of the EU project with the Western Balkans is not its size. We are, the 6 Western Balkan countries are a size less than Romania. Our GDP is 1% of the EU GDP, less than 4% of the EU population. So EU could absorb us tomorrow and no one noticed that something has happened in the system. The problem is this formal membership process, this voting consensus-based decision-making in EU. So EU member states are afraid that enlarging now without some previous preparations or additional institutional reforms will render EU infunctional. So we thought, if this is the source of problem for us and for them, why we don't do a paradigm shift? We focus on the process instead on this formal momentum. But crucial precondition to thinking creatively is that this should not be seen as some alternative to membership. Yeah. Therefore, to us, was crucial that Charles Michel, the president of the EU Council, introduced 2030 as an indicative year for membership. So as long as 2030 is this indicative year, which empirically has shown to be an important incentive, as 2004 was for the Central European countries, then we are certain and confident enough that we are not talking about a parallel process, where the end result would be some second-tier members of the EU. But rather, we are talking about how to fill the gap in between now and 2030, as I say, to build a scaffold that will maintain the credibility of the EU process in the Western Balkans for this for the years ahead of us. And we envisaged three-tier process or three-pillar process. One, involvement or inclusion of the candidates into the formal bodies of the EU as we meet criteria, certainly with an observer status at the moment. And we took a concrete example. North Macedonia has aligned 100% with EU common foreign security policy. There's no rationale why I am not sitting around the Foreign Affairs Council table. What's the reason for that? We have almost 100% visa regime aligned with the EU. So our economy is suffering because we have introduced visa to Chinese, to Arabs, to other countries that EU has a visa regime. And EU doesn't even acknowledge it or recognize it. So we are around the table and discuss the common foreign policy challenges of the European Union. And also, at least symbolically, make a distinction between those who have 100% aligned themselves and those who have not. So this is one pillar. And we have good examples for that by now. So energy community and transport community is a good example because it has shown to work out very efficiently. Candidates energy ministers and transport ministers already participate in the meetings of energy and transport community of the European Union. If we can expand this gradually as countries meet certain criteria, we will already be in the system without challenging the EU decision-making process. EU will get to know us. We will get to be more informed about how the system works. Second is single market, and I think here growth plan is a plan in the right direction. So we access the single market again as we meet criteria. And third, and this should be always coupled with single market, is access to some kind of cohesive and structural funds. Because exposing candidates to single market without supporting it from the other side, you simply make it too vulnerable to the single market pressure, at least on economies who are not still ready to compete within that system. Therefore, we say it should be gradual and coupled with financial support. Yeah. Maybe not 100% access, being eligible to cohesive and structural fund. I know that EU member states are a little bit protective when it comes to sharing the portfolio with other countries, but at least gradual increase and introducing mechanisms similar to cohesive and structural fund would be a way forward. And I'm pretty sure, and I will wrap up here, when we will do this, we will sit around all tables, enter single market, have access to structural and cohesive funds, while EU is still in a comfortable position of not being challenged in its decision-making process. I believe that when we will become formal member states, it won't be a news in the headlines. It will be like Norway joining EU today. So this is our vision on how the process should be designed in the following years.
Well, as a Dane, it's obviously always interesting when people mention Norway, also because it's one of the countries that had a referendum twice and voted no twice, so never joined the European Union. But who knows? Maybe at a certain stage.
Maybe we would vote against. It's important that we are integrated in the process. Exactly. And we have no space for other malign factors here in this region.
And thank you for being so concrete, but I guess in order for that plan to work, I mean, there would also have to be a strong sort of focus upon rule of law. So in order then to receive funds from the European Union, you have to live up to the various criteria. Secondly, I presume it would also be very good if you then have some wording in the European Council conclusion saying that some of this is what we'll do, then maybe putting forward and now I'm dreaming, but the date of 2030, sending the signal that the EU is ready when you're ready. But I guess now I'm almost dreaming, because at the moment we are focusing upon whether it's actually possible to open negotiations or not. And Galusha, I promised you also that you would be able to.
If I just can comment on that. First, I did not imply that we can do cherry picking.
So you did not. No.
So therefore, I always said as we meet criteria. So entering single market as you meet the rule of law criteria. And it's always my sentences are coupled with this suffix as we meet criteria, because I understand the concerns that would occur in member states saying that, okay, candidates will cherry pick what they want and then not be responsible to the value system that EU shares. So absolutely no dilemmas on that. And also, I think it's critical that during this December Council of the EU, there are some decisions related to this approach. 2030, gradual integration, and certainly preparations for the multi-annual financial framework to envisage new member states.
Yeah, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult to enlarge if you haven't sort of already prepared the EU budget for that, or the long frame of the budget running for 7 years. Galusha, there is a question here for you. It's a bit difficult, but I'm sure you're able to tackle it. It comes from Romania, and the question is basically, okay, everything is fine here. We agree that we should open negotiations, but how do the enlargement member states managed to persuade Hungary and apparently also Slovakia, Austria to accept that, since the value-based discourse doesn't look to ring a bell, the question goes. So what's the last sort of minute sort of arguments here that could possibly play a role?
The value-based approach, but I would say also the security-based rationale, and we have seen from the polls as well, the economy rationale doesn't seem to play a role among the publics. But among politicians, I think, well, I think we could safely say, and Luke, you're more experienced in this topic than me, this is the biggest, the most important stress test for EU's unity. And if if 27 cannot find unity and consensus on issues on the gravity of the situation such as this one, then I think this would mean that maybe we look into the beginning of the end of the EU, or we look into transformation of the EU as we know it into something else. I don't know, but this should be the rationale. So I think the enlargement topic, it's also about, you know, consolidating and securing European space. And so it's up to the leaders how they envision this European space, secure European space, together as a unit of 27. So, and if they can't find a joint understanding, then, you know, I don't want to go as far as to say we're all doomed, but it doesn't look very good for EU anyhow.
And what's your reaction to that, Mr. Minister?
If
there is no agreement, I mean, now, I mean, on Sunday morning or whatever, yeah. I mean, there's a breakdown of the European Council. How would that affect your country, basically?
I think then we are left with one station more, and this is March European Council. I hope we will do our best to give the right signals and messages now in December. But then I think the lost hope would be March. And then as we enter into the European elections, I believe that we are entering into an unpredictable period, and pretty sure that we will regret for missing a huge historic opportunity that it will bite us later on.
And your country specifically, because you mentioned earlier also the constitutional situation.
I specifically meant also North Macedonia, because we have elections somewhere in May. So March would give us another opportunity to try in the upcoming 3 months to reach a consensus here, or the necessary majority for the constitutional reform, so we could jump in this lost train going to Europe, because I believe after May everything will be unpredictable here and in Brussels.
Is that then also your take, Angalusha, that this is almost now or never? What, or do you also see that there is a station in March?
Well, I think it's going to be, you know, if there's no credible political message coming out of the council meeting, of course, it's not good news at all. And I stand behind that, you know, it's going to be a serious blow to Ukrainians first and foremost, but to other aspiring countries as well. But there is a way to keep the Europeanization debate going. And there are different ways. I think Minister Osmani already mentioned some of these ways. And so there has to be a continuation of the green agenda transitioning, and this is how the candidate countries and both neighborhoods could continue their integration into the EU with EU countries. There is also the energy issues that were mentioned as well. And I wouldn't rule out also the economic integration, which is to benefit of the EU and also to benefit of the candidate aspiring countries. And I think what we fail to talk about in these discussions is the cost of non-enlargement. Yeah. And I think this should be brought into the equation when we talk about a negative decision at the end of this week. And maybe this should be part of the discussion, the cost of non-enlargement. And hopefully by March, there will be some more you know, contribution to the debate. And so the European leaders can also start communicating the importance of this to their publics, because I also think this is a problem, the lack of strategic communication. Again, you hear these excuses, we don't want to rock the boat before the end of parliamentary elections, EU parliamentary elections,
exactly.
so that the far right is not hijacking all these issues. But it has to be started somewhere. And I think, we're already 20 months into the war, and we hear all these analyses that Russia is gaining foot into the battlefield and so on and so forth. So I don't know. I mean, it might never be the right time, but it has to start somewhere. So I think a combination of strategic communication and continuing the Europeanization debate would be something that could still save the day, following a supposedly negative conclusion at the end of the council meeting.
Yeah, so I could clarify basically what's the cost of us not being able to agree, because that could then, possibly trigger then a different debate than we have now, where many people that think that's also one of the core conclusions of your data is that people really haven't made up their mind, which is, I think that's also what the minister alluded to, well, that you do not make up your mind about some that's that abstract before you actually sort of really have to do it. I think that's probably, very much the case here.
Can I add a point here?
Sure.
In our data, there is 37% of Europeans polled who don't have an opinion.
Yeah.
So this is not small. These people are still trying to find out what is happening and what is going on around ourselves. And so that's why I think strategic communication is very important.
If one looks upon the what's happening, tomorrow there's going to be the meeting West Balkans, right? Mr. Minister, what's the interlinkages between that meeting and the summit? What will be the messages from there? Is there interlinkage here?
No, I think it's important that EU maintains this intensive high-level dialogue with the Western Balkans. They were together in Tirana just a few months ago, and then now in Brussels. This is crucial. It's also part of it should be part of the Stratcom. For the public opinions in the member states, but also for our public opinions, and certainly the leaders should be there when these decisions will be made or not be made tomorrow or on the 15th in Brussels. So I don't think there will be some concrete outcome from that meeting. But it's a message, and I think it's important, and EU should continue to invest in that dialogue.
Okay, but we'll be following that as well. So I think this concludes our very interesting conversation. You will be able to find all the reports I referred to in the chat, obviously also at the website of ECFR.eu. And with that, we will now all be following the summit a lot wiser, and we will also be keeping a very close eye on what's happening in regards to the West Balkans, and particularly also some of the ideas you mentioned about observer status, for instance, having also more gradual enlargement process or accession. That's going to be something that could possibly then also create a new momentum, even if there's but we still hope there will be agreement on, maybe late Saturday night, who knows, but at least that could be one prediction from here. So thank you very much, and thank you so much also to our two panelists for being so open and also very good of explaining your various points of view. So thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye.